So no tax on tips. That's number one. And this was a campaign promise from especially Nevada, where there's a lot of people who work in casinos and things like that, and they make a lot of tips as far as a percentage of their income. So there actually is a bill already in Congress called the No Tax on Tips Act. And basically, the way this bill is structured is that it creates a new below the line deduction. And below the line means after adjusted gross income. So let's say you're a waiter. If you work at a high end place, maybe you make 80 grand and 50 of that is tips. I've seen that kind of thing many times. And so your W 2 would still say $80,000. And there would be some kind of information field specifying how much was tips. And then that would go into your income along with other whatever else is part of your income. Your adjusted gross income would be calculated, and then tips would be deductible up to, according to this version, up to $25,000. So immediately you run into an issue. When you have deductible things like your mortgage interest or like your charitable contributions, there's a standard deduction and then there are itemized deductions. You calculate all your itemized deductions, and if it's less than the standard for your filing status, then you just go with standard. And then if it's more than the standard deduction, you go with itemized. So it sounds simple enough. However, there's a dead weight loss issue. So if you're in 2025, if you're a married filing joint filer, your standard deduction is $30,000. So if you have $35,000 worth of itemized deductions, really you're only getting an extra benefit from that last five. So if you have $25,000 worth of tips, and that puts you over into, let's say, $32,000 worth of itemized deductions, great, but you're really only getting a discount on $2,000. So there's that issue. To partially counteract that, there's what this bill is suggesting is we create a separate below the line deduction where you'll have your standard deduction or itemized deduction of however much that is, and then below that you'll have another deduction of your tips up to, again, according to this version, $25,000. If that ends up happening, then you're able to separate out that dead weight loss and really get the maximum effect from that tips deduction. Will this survive? Will this make it into the whole plan? We don't know. But the same kind of mechanism was done during COVID for charity. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but there was a special line for charitable contributions up to $300, even if you didn't itemize during those years. So you had your standard deduction of 12.6 if you were single, and then an extra $300 worth of deductions for charitable contributions, and then that reduced your taxable income, and then your tax was assessed after that. So this is the same kind of mechanism that they're talking about. There are some nuances, though, in that if you go into the definitions, is that, let's see, exclusion for certain employees. Such term shall not include any amount received by an individual in the course of employment by an employer if such individual had for the preceding taxable year compensation in the excess under the amount of section 414, published list of occupations traditionally receiving tips. So no later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of the Treasury shall publish a list of occupations. So immediately you start having questions. It's okay, if taxes are exempt or deductible or whatever the case ends up being, it's like, how about I just make a third of my salary tips? Why not? And so to head that off at the pass, they're saying, okay, this is restricted to a list of occupations traditionally receiving tips. And they're trying to say you got to match an occupation. But there's a problem already. So the only place your occupation is listed on your tax return is on the occupation line on page 2 of your 1040. So that's where you sign, date, and have occupation. So does that mean your occupation has to match one of these things? So if you're a waiter or a bartender or a casino dealer or whatever, is that the thing that has to be on that line? Because I've seen plenty of people put in just vague general things, clerk, employee, all kinds of things like that. And then what happens if that's the case? What happens if you have tips in a traditionally tipped job like a bartender, but that's not your main job, that's a side job? Okay, so 9 to 5, you go to work and do some office work. And then on the weekends, you bartend at this place. So if that's the case, your occupation is going to be whatever you do at the office. It's not going to be bartender. Or maybe it's going to be office worker / bartender. Or so immediately you start to in line with this pending